you some stuff you might not have heard of.
Okay.
There's an album by a band called the Claypool Lennon Delirium.
Wow.
Oh, I know them.
That's the album is called. Let me just check the actual full title of the album because I think it's called "The Monolith of Phobos." Sorry.
Isn't that John Lennon's son?
Is it really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Oh well, if you know things, Cliff, that it seems like you do, then this is excellent.
Like
You've blown me away with some knowledge here.
It's like a crazy psychedelic album cover.
It's really psycho. It's really like psychedelic.
Yeah. Really good.
Do you know what that makes? That makes sense if it is, because it is very Beatlesy in places.
Yeah. It totally is.
Yeah, it's like the Beatles morphed with kind of Captain Beefheart, like a bit of Zappa. It's very concepty, very psych, but I loved it. I thought it was absolutely wicked.
That's the album I've got as well. Yeah, the yellow one, Monolith of Phobos.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think there's some good stuff on YouTube of them as well.
Oh well, that's some good knowledge. Okay, a couple of others that I scored quite highly. The Conor Oberst album, who is you might know as Bright Eyes.
Yeah.
He has an album called Ruminations from that year, which I just thought was brilliant. It's just the songwriting on it. You can't fault his songwriting. He's such a good songwriter.
He is. I love that.
I know it maybe is a bit of a Marmite voice, I suppose, but
I mean, there is that the album that everybody seems to own by Bright Eyes is it's a wonderful record.
Is that Lifted? Or there's two quite big ones, isn't there? There's Lifted, and then it's a long title. It's something about keeping your ears to the soil.
I think it's the long title one. It's got a beautifully recorded double bass, which is why I love it. But apparently the songs on it as well.
It's a great album.
And then if you want some kind of what I would call cool indie, very, very kind of BBC Six cool indie, probably make it onto Steve Lamac's show type vibes. There's an album that I'm listening to a lot from it by someone called Lucy Dacus. I don't know if it's Dacus or Dacus. It's spelled Dacus.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I really enjoyed that album as well.
We'll put them in there. We'll make a playlist, won't we, John?
You will.
Very honest. Oh my god, we're playlist one episode, and we still don't have the playlist because you wrote down all the songs.
I never made the playlist.
I'm going to do a YouTube playlist and then send me the songs, and then you haven't sent them to me, have you?
No.
I know this is not really how interviews work, but what you've not touched on yet, which I was looking forward to, was I was looking forward to just hearing what's been going on for the two of you, and if I had anything interesting to say about them. I mean, I know rather than it all be about me, I know that's how an interview works.
Well, what we thought to do is we're going to do. I'll cut this, but we're going to do, or I might not. Who cares? I might do a little. We're going to do a little bit before we go to you. So do a bit before you come on, and then we'll cut to this. So that's probably why, because we're not going to waste Pete's time talking about ourselves.
But no, I'm interested. I'd like to hear it. Because one of the things I've enjoyed, one of the things I've really enjoyed about the ones you've done so far that made me so keen to do it actually was you've had some interesting conversations that have made me think about stuff that I thought, oh, I've got something I'd really like to say to them about this. Yeah. So I'm keen to hear what you guys have been up to. Is
this to do with tapes? I think we've dealt with that.
Let's not go there anymore.
Yeah, tapes have gone.
I'll make my own.
You've been doing a lot of reading, John. I'm interested in your reading.
I have. I'm reading a book on why Buddhism is right at the moment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting because my course is dealing with the non-self. So, the idea that there isn't a self, that you don't have control. You don't actually have control over your body or your mind or anything. Yeah, it keeps me awake at night reading that book.
No, that sounds
It's a good book.
fascinating.
Robert White, I think it is. Right.
Okay.
That sounds great.
And is
Well,
that
no.
is that just out of interest, or are you kind of pursuing Buddhism as a potential way of life? Or?
I am a meditator, and my family situation creates a need to sit still at 6 o'clock in the morning before I start.
Yeah,
my job as a carer. So yeah. I don't really subscribe to religions. It's not something I'm looking for.
it's interesting with Buddhism, though, isn't it? Because I say something similar, but when I talk to a few people who I know who kind of are involved in Buddhism or interested in Buddhism a lot more, and quite a lot of them say, "Oh, it's not really a religion, is it?" And I think there's a kind of a bit of a hierarchy amongst people with religions, isn't there, where they think like there's those religions, but then there's Buddhism that's a bit different.
I guess Buddhism gets cast as a kind of way of life, but in fact, all religions have kind of a doctrine of how to live your life, and they're all fairly similar, about being good to other people and etc. But yeah, the Dalai Lama is a deity, and it's definitely a religion, and it depends which, but there's two strong forces in Buddhism, like two different schools. So there's definitely a religious element but I love the Vipassana meditation side of it. That speaks to
For the
me.
record, I also agree with you that it is definitely a religion as well. I always find it interesting talking to people who consider themselves a religious or kind of almost anti-religion in some ways, but they will very happily subscribe to Buddhism. And I always feel like I'm kind of throwing a bit of a firework into them when I say, well, Buddhism is also a religion. It's kind of it's
totally
interesting.
Yeah, and Buddhism always has obviously the image of peace, and it promotes peace. But then obviously, it's humans, and humans. There are Buddhists that are also killing people, which just sounds mental to me. I go, really? But yeah, so yeah, it has a dark
I
side.
think maybe once upon a time, though, if you had said that we'd end up in a world where Christians had killed millions of people, as had Muslims, I reckon there will have been once upon a time where that would have sounded like an insane thing to even imagine might happen as well, though.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to think with so much bloodshed being spilled by both of those religions.
Yeah.
At one point they were peaceful, but yeah, no, I'm loving my reading. I'm loving my course. It's just not enough time to sit and read. Like I try and read 100 pages a day of different things, but I'm coming up to my final assignment, so I've got to really focus on Greek plays and the music and protest of South Africa, which is really interesting. I knew nothing about apartheid, and that's been quite a shock to the system.
Yeah, totally. Do you audio book as well?
I audio books, but books I've already read.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You see, I've heard other people say that, which I find fascinating.
I think mainly because I audiobook when I drive, and if I'm listening to something I don't know, I'll drive off the road. So yeah, that's quite, and it's almost the same with podcasts. I listen to Sam Harris quite a lot, and I started to listen to him while I run, but I found myself getting injured listening to him while I run, because he'll say something and I'm like, what the yeah. So
what's his podcast like?
I love it. I find it really challenging. He's very rational. It's very his podcast on George Floyd is really interesting. Racial politics in America, really interesting, and a sobering account to make us all kind of step back a bit from the brink of, tearing society to pieces and pushing Donald Trump into power. But he also says some things where you're just like, oh, that's hard to hear.
Well, I've read The End of Faith of his, and full disclaimer, I went to a Catholic school. My mum's still quite religious. I kind of grew up with it, but I read it because I was kind of pushed into it by some friends when I was at uni, because
Mm.
although I didn't subscribe to religion as such still, and I would have said that I wasn't religious, I think I would say I'm empathetic to those who are. Is maybe my best way of describing it. And I was kind of pushed into reading The End of Faith as a way of kind of, I guess, those people trying to go to me, but it's all so crazy, essentially. And I couldn't really make my mind upon it in many. I couldn't make my mind upon his style in many ways. I didn't know if it was just a bit testing in some ways, but
Yeah. He's definitely challenged his. In fact, weirdly, his mindfulness app, Waking Up, I think it's called, is really good. That's really good if you really want to get into not having a head and getting into the kind of metaphysics of meditation. But he wrote another book that is really hard to listen to, which basically covers the ugly past of Catholicism to do with pedophilia and all that sort of stuff. And it's just so shocking. It's just like, I don't understand how the churches weren't burned to the ground, you know, when all these reports came out, the horrific things that happened to people. So, I mean, his podcast, I mean, he's just done one on, I think it's child pornography or the child sex industry. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
Yeah, it's not running listening, that is it?
No, because I will just get injured. I'll just run too quick. It's funny if you're not concentrating on what you're doing, you know, you injure yourself. But yeah, what are you reading at the moment? You've got lots of books on your bookshelf.
I tend to have about 3 books on the go at once, typically. So I'm reading. I'm listening to In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Classic.
Yeah.
That I've never read any Capote. Just thought it was about time that I did that. You know, it's kind of one of the classics, isn't it? Which is decent actually. I'm really enjoying it, and it's a good audio version of it as well. So I've been listening to that a lot when I'm doing DIY, essentially, which I'm rebuilding my garden at the moment, my patio. So I've been listening to that. I'm reading a Derren Brown book, actually, the first Derren Brown book, where he kind of just discusses a lot of his techniques and kind of magic and that kind of stuff, which is really cool. Actually, he's got I find him such a charismatic person to watch. I didn't know if it'd translate in a book, but it's just written in his speaking style. It's really cool. I'm enjoying it. And then I'd normally have something else on the go, but I'm yet to start it. I've just finished Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I don't know if you've read any of her books previously. Purple Hibiscus and Half a Yellow Sun is the other. She's a Nigerian writer.
Yes.
Which is brilliant. And it's just, so I did what a lot of people did, I suppose, which is when Black Lives Matter was kind of first dying, and just after the George Floyd killing, I kind of did that classic I feel like I should turn to some literature thing, and I read a few of the books that you kind of told to read, and I think I recommended that Akala one to you, which I thought, which is brilliant. And then I ended up just accidentally reading a couple of fiction books that I didn't even realize were going to be really relevant to it, but they were. I read a book called Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadetta Ever something or other, which is set in the UK, but from the position of just maybe like 20 different Black women, and it kind of follows all of them across many years. Really fascinating. And then I ended up reading this Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie book, which is very similar, but from kind of the perspective of a Nigerian woman living in America and then moving back to Nigeria, and kind of the differences in the cultures. And really fascinating, really great fiction books, but also just very poignant for the time.
I've just bought the Girl, Woman, Other. I went out and bought, because Waterstones opened in Leamington. I was like, oh my God, there's a bookshop open. And then the woman thought I was utterly nuts. I bought 9 books and then went, oh fuck, that's my universal credit gone.
But this is why I've got this bookshelf. I have 1 or 2 bookshelves with the sideways books on, because I can't. If I go into a bookshop, then I'm coming out with at least 3 books typically. Yeah. And what I've been trying to do in lockdown, because I've had this pile of unread books just growing really for about 10 years, and I've been like, I'm really going to try and read some of the books on this, which is why I'm reading the Capote, which is why I read the Americana. I've been trying to just plow my way through books that I was been meaning to read for ages.
Yeah. It's a really tough thing. Me and an ex-partner used to have a rule where you had to read 5 books on your bookshelf and then you could buy a new one. And I'm pretty sure I've got the ratio mixed up the other way.
It's basically how
Yes.
me and Hannah live as well. She's just as bad as I am. We're both just constantly buying books, and I read on my Kindle as well. But then I'll buy the book after I've read it on my Kindle.
Yes. Yeah, I find Kindle a bit like streaming. I just find like I might listen to something or read something. I read a book on on pandemics, and I was like, I have to just have the physical book. Otherwise it doesn't feel like I've read it or listened to it. Or
the beauty of what I've enjoyed about it, took me a while to be persuaded on the Kindle, and now I'll read quite a lot on it, just for because when we were working away from homes, I used to get the train to Leeds to work there a lot, and just little things like you can just leave it out open and your hands don't need to be holding it, and just little, or if I'm lying down, if I'm hanging out in the sun or any of those things, just it's really simple to kind of not have to position yourself, so you've also got to hold a book in a certain way. Those kinds of things I've really kind of been sold on. But then once I finished it, I'm like, I really want it. I judge other people on their bookshelves in the houses. I know it's a terrible thing, but I totally do. I always look at other people's bookshelves in the houses. So it made me think that if I do that to other people, maybe they do it to me too. So now I just need to. So like that's why I have a copy of everything I've read on my shelves, just as
I go through purges, so I think it's the Catholic in me. Every now and again, I'm like, why have I got all these books? I'm not going to read them all. Let's get rid of them. And then I get rid of them, and then I go and buy them again. So there are several books I've bought 4 or 5 times. It's just ridiculous. I should just put them into storage.
Well, there was a few of my unread thing that I was like, do you know what? I think I'm never going to read this. I think I've been carrying it around between 5 houses over 10 years. I think I'm just not ever going to read it. So I did get rid of a few eventually.
Yeah. I think my courses meant that that it just points you in different directions. You're like, well, I've never read any Greek plays. So then you just find yourself buying, Sophocles, and just sitting there going, okay, I'm going to get to terms with this. And I'm studying philosophy. So there's just so much.
I was going to ask you about the course, what it was that you're studying.
Philosophy and psychological studies, but I never really attended school, so I don't have like a formal education. So you had to do like a humanities. Like your first year was humanities, arts and humanities, and it's been fascinating because I just have all these opinions that I've just gotten off probably it's just other musicians late at night, and then just reading about Cleopatra or Elizabeth I and just thinking, oh, hang on a second, I'm loving Elizabeth I, but I hate the royal family. It's been a challenge to some of those kind of prejudices that I've never questioned.
In the philosophy, are you studying certain schools or certain philosophers, or?
All we've touched on at the moment is Plato, Aristotle, and Plato. Mary Wollstonecraft has come up. So just that at the moment. We're about to go full on into the psychology, which starts in September. So
cool. I did a philosophy A level, so I might have some books that you can borrow if you ever want any of them or any of that kind of thing. Because philosophy A level is weird because although hardly anyone does it, so it ends up being the same as first year degree philosophy in a lot of ways.
No, I think weirdly I'd credit Sam Harris for my interest in philosophy and things like that, just because he touches on so many subjects, and I'm very easily led. So I'll hear him and I think, oh yeah, that's exactly right, and then I'll go and say it. I think it might have even done it to you. So just regurgitated something I'd read Sam Harris, and you'll go.
I'm the same. I think it's natural, isn't it? And because people are persuasive,
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard to then make yourself try and read the other side or see the other side. I find it such a hard thing I try to do it, but I don't do it anywhere near as much as I wish that I did. I've plowed my way through a whole load of kind of socialist books recently, and I keep thinking I really ought to like be reading the other side of it to form my opinion, rather than like knowing my stance and then reading all the things to back up my own stance.
Yeah. But then we live in the other side of it, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So just have to turn the television on, and we've got Boris Johnson. So, yes, no comment. No, it's hard. I found Twitter, like me and Cliff had a Warden Parker Twitter that wasn't doing anything, and I started to follow authors I liked, philosophers I liked, and then people that were just had opposing views, and I followed them, and I found Twitter really stressful, and I'd be on it for an hour at a time, just having read horrific things.
It's hard, isn't it?
Really hard.
I did the same thing. During the last election campaign, I tried to not spend all my time posting on Facebook about what I thought, because I know a lot of people thought similar. So I started liking the pages of my local Conservative MPs. And then in doing so, my algorithms started to change.
Yes.
So I started to get all the same adverts that other people, and that was just the biggest eye opener that I've ever had on it all. Really, is kind of seeing that and following the comments, and so started commenting on things as well. And then just your algorithms completely change, and that changes everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've had to rein back partly because Warden Parker is me and Cliff, and it's a band and not me. So I have to be really careful, because obviously Cliff might, have totally different views to me, and and we're not politicians. We're supposed to be musicians. But it is really difficult, when you look at football and racism, and the banner that was flew over, I think it was the Man City ground, or I follow a whole load of, I suppose you'd call them black commentators, or that were just berated, the abuse they were getting, and it was just like, how can we sit back and go that football doesn't have a racism problem? Like it definitely does on social media. Like I read some things I was genuinely just really shocked at, and wanted to respond, and I was just like, there's no point in responding. You're obviously not going to change anybody's minds.
You
online.
lose a lot of time to it. I found myself it really negatively affecting my mood on some of the stuff recently, because I've ended up in that kind of black hole of, I think it's really important to know what's out there, but also I've ended up lost in like comments on LBC is the worst, like on LBC Facebook threads of and then I found like 3 hours later, and I've like replied to everybody on it, and I'm like, oh god, I really got to let this go for a bit.
Yeah,
meditate.
And yeah, that's where the meditation comes in, isn't it? I guess.
Absolutely. And I think Donald Trump did that interview recently, and I didn't watch it, and it was ridiculed by everybody on Twitter, and I really felt strongly that we are giving. I mean, I've mentioned him, and I was trying not to, but by mentioning him and publicizing and sharing, I just wondered if we were all acting as part of the game. And I kind of wanted to use Twitter as a lot more of like, I only really want to like promote music I like, books I like reading, or people I like. And there's enough negativity in the world. I don't need to make negative comments about Taylor Swift's record, although I really wanted to. But what was the point? Why not just push something that I actually really like instead? And so I don't want it to be edgeless, because I think debate is important, but also there's an awful lot of stuff that just gets, and Taylor Swift's just was all over our Twitter feed, like how great that record was. And I really liked the first track, but then after that, I just thought this is, it was kind of heralded as a kind of great, folk crossover record. And yet it's so bland and banal and, boring. And I've just slagged her off, even though I said I wouldn't. Yeah. I'm just basically a hypocrite.
It's so hard not to be there, isn't it? I think that's like the biggest thing that I've learned through all of this, through highlighting a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff, through lots, like it's, well, as everything's said, everything's so institutionalized, and like we're all, I think quite a lot of us on the social left are kind of quite hypocritical as well in
Yeah,
many ways. You know, the amount of people I see who are absolutely, you know, not literally, but absolutely screaming in other people's faces about being tolerant. Like, you know, this kind of
Yeah.
like, I think it's such a fascinating dichotomy with left leaning people on how they could be with people that don't agree with them in many ways.
Yeah.
Quite. And often these subjects are so massive that an average Joe can't really cut it on Facebook doing a post. You know, it's too big. And you're, like you've said, you're better off going and reading some books and seeing more sides of the story than just sharing a picture from someone else saying what you think is right. It's,
It's sad though that it could be such a good forum for, maybe, and this is me being really lefty, but a great forum for discussion. Like, genuinely, I've put stuff up online because I want people to come back to me and go, hang on a second, that guy was a, you know, misogynist or a racist, or, you know, like, I'm looking for, I want to learn. I don't want people to go, great, well done, or big heart, or love you.
But it's dangerous but I'm totally with you. But it's dangerous because what happens is, and it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you're on in this, is that no matter what you put up, even if you're putting something up for the willingness to learn, is someone's always going to basically shout at you about, like, it's the equivalent of them like screaming in your face about it. If you, I'll recommend, if you've not read it, the John Ronson book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It's brilliant. It's really good because well, I mean, if you read any John Ronson, then you'll know his kind of Louis Theroux-esque kind of style. But he does a lot about people who have posted stuff on social media that probably any of us would also go, oh my God, what a disgrace. But then he's really kind of followed up what it's meant to them, and just this idea of public shaming and kind of like the virtual stocks, particularly from the left, with people whose opinions aren't right. And what I found fascinating about it is, if as a, you know, kind of a socialist left, which, you know, we all kind of sit on, if what you really want is the change that you say that you want, then you've really got to think hard about how you actually achieve that, and whether the methods sit within the framework of what you're already doing, or whether actually you need to approach things with a bit more of an open ear, I suppose, even if you really profoundly disagree with someone.
Yeah, I mean, you can't move for public shaming. I mean, the COVID has really pushed that. I found myself having to pull back and going, hang on a second, I'm just pointing fingers at people. They're not wearing masks, or and then thinking, why? I'm just creating division, and people are going to react badly to that if you publicly shame them.
I had a fascinating discussion with the other day with one of the charities I'm working with at the moment. The person that runs it is Hungarian, and I had this discussion with her just off the back of seeing a lot of what I think we'd all consider to be kind of conspiracy theorist nuts about, like, COVID and all the obvious stuff about kind of 5G towers and all of that, but even all the subtle stuff of, like, it was around when masks were coming in, and I saw a lot of kind of, this is how they get you, that it's like making you wear a muzzle, it'll be and all of this stuff, and I'd been dismissing it as like crazy people essentially. But a really fascinating conversation with her where she was saying that she was finding the level of government rule implementation at the moment quite triggering, because when you've grown up in a state where there is a totalitarian regime in power, and it's a very real thing, which is not what any of us are used to, that when you start to see these things where they are impinging on your civil liberties, it just kind of, she found it really triggering for that time, and she found it quite uncomfortable, even though she'd consider herself kind of an artsy lefty person. She'd never call herself a socialist, she'd never call herself any of those things, because it has such a connotation that I think, in a privileged position that we're in, to have never lived under that kind of regime, it seems so distant, doesn't it? It seems so distant that actually maybe they're not all nuts that feel like that, even if it seems so far removed. I just think I never really thought about it like that.
No, that is interesting. Weirdly, my mum has carers, and we had a young carer here. And during COVID, she was talking about they burnt down a mast around here in Birmingham, and she was sort of praising it was great, the Chinese, and all the conspiracy theories. And it was fascinating meeting someone who just wasn't at all self-conscious about expressing something that to me sounded utterly ludicrous. But it was really interesting listening to her rationale. And I guess I couldn't stop myself patronizing, thinking, well, she obviously hasn't got the right education or etc. But it was essentially she was looking for some reason that this massive event, this restriction on her life, her family's life, her religion as well, had come into place, and she didn't trust the governments, and she didn't trust big companies, and actually, essentially, I don't either.
No, exactly.
I don't trust China and their human rights. It's just horrific. So
I think you're right. I think what you say there is really interesting because it's exactly how I feel. You kind of adopt this slightly patronizing thing about, but what that conversation with this person made me really check it is actually this is the absolute definition of privilege, whether it's white privilege or whether it's Western privilege or whether it's any other privilege. But the fact that I can sit here slightly patronizingly say you don't have the right education without considering actually it's entirely my privilege for having never lived in that situation that I don't understand why you might feel that way, really. That that's where we all are in the white West in many ways, isn't it? Across, and it made me just reevaluate the way I see everything in so many ways.
No, I think there's so many things. COVID has definitely brought up a lot of those things. And I've even struggled controversially. The clap for carers NHS thing. I've got a lot of problems with care and the lack of skilled care, certainly that my mum's getting, and I've really struggled with it. I mean, I have clapped carers because there are loads of good ones. I've dealt with loads of good ones, but I also deal with an awful lot of really.
I'm absolutely no way surprised. I used to work in care. That's how I got into community with music. I was a domiciliary care worker for people with learning disabilities, essentially in a house. And when I first started that job, there was a lot of, I'm going to sound like a snob, but I really don't mean to. There was a lot of people like me that worked there that were kind of university educated and had gone into it because they were really interested in working with people with learning disabilities and autism, and had a kind of a fascination with how we could care for those people.
Yeah.
But the more time that went by, the thing is, it's terribly paid and it's an unskilled job. And what started to happen was, as some people left because they could get better paid jobs, they started to employ more people. The turnover of staff is huge, and the more people they'd employ was more kind of the muscle, because what a lot of people we worked with were quite difficult, were quite volatile, and could be quite violent. And the more the team meetings became less about understanding the person's conditions and more about how to essentially maintain control. And I got so uncomfortable with that. But that's because the people that they were employing were typically ex-forces, quite a lot of, or were people who'd a lot of ex-tradesmen, people looking for a more stable job, but on a similar wage level to what they were used to, which is almost minimum wage, unskilled jobs. And the more those things are treated as unskilled, the more people the people that go for those jobs are a certain type of person. And it's kind of...
Yeah. And it's nuts to think that something that requires so much skill, more skill than I've ever had to encounter in the music industry, or at least a very different set of skills to care for my mum, takes nuance to feed my mum. That is a skill that I am lacking, and I'm learning and failing, and anything more, I can play very quickly on the double bass. That took time. This is very different. It's such a highly skilled and underappreciated job, and
it's everything that you just said. It's a learning role. It is constant, because every person that a carer will work with will be different. So you've got to have an interest in learning about the conditions, about the person, and learning those things. And if it's the kind of job where people aren't bothered about learning, they're just bothered about what is the set of things I've got to do and where's my wage back at the end of it, then how are you ever going to provide person-centered care, which is what it's meant to be?
Yeah. Don't get me started. That's a whole other podcast I might set up about why I'm going to sack my carers.
Oh dear. Good.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm conscious that we've got 3 minutes 40.
Yeah, cool. And I've blabbered on for ages, and feel free to use any of that or don't use it. I
No,
totally
really,
I was really interested in the interesting conversation, not just what I've done in the past, like with my life.
Yeah,
I know that's not how an interview works,
but then maybe it's because we've not done this before, and Cliff's obviously put a lot of work into. He knows you very well, and so I was like, oh, I don't know Pete very well, actually. I like Pete, but I don't actually know anything about what he's done. But it's interesting because I actually think a combination of like integrating someone into the podcast and the way it runs actually might be more interesting.
I think there's something in that.
Yeah,
because some of the interest as a guest is I've listened to and enjoyed your podcast, and I thought, I'd really what I think is interesting about having a guest on is getting them into the thing you're already doing in some way. So I was kind of interested in commenting on what you were doing as well. So,
whereas I think we were approaching it as a kind of showcase, highlighting somebody, but actually I think it would be quite it's just interesting, like people would expect Pete Ord to talk about music and labels and what he does, but maybe not the books he's read or that he used to work in care or those sort of things. I think that's kind of interesting.
We need to end it. If we cut that bit out, we need to finish it. Well, I started it, so John, why don't you round it off? Because you've just been talking. Why don't you finish it up somehow? You got to cut back into carers.
God, how the hell are we going to do that? I mean, surely just to wrap it up, to say, I mean, I've found this genuinely really interesting, and I could. Our podcast is a bit like a pub chat, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's what the great thing about podcasts, isn't it?
That's what it is. That's basically what it is. I've enjoyed it. Great. Thank you very much, Pete, for joining us on the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I've had a really lovely evening chatting to you both. It's really, really great to have these conversations with like-minded people.
Fantastic. I've written down everything. I'm going to go and read all your books and listen to all your music and continue trying to become Pete Ord. We'll see you soon. Take it easy. Good luck with all the gigs and everything else. Take care. Bye bye.
Great. Cheers, guys. Take it easy. Thanks,